you never know the reason that someone comes to your martial arts school. Somebody walking in, sometimes they'll tell you, like in the case, like, oh, I need this and this for my child or for myself. But it's the instructor's role to give kind of the right medicine, so to speak. Sometimes, like you're saying, the parent might not know the right dosage of medicine that the student needs, particularly in the realm of like conflict resolution and physical violence. But that's where the instructor should be, the expert, and know exactly what to do. It's multifaceted, the functions and the benefits of martial arts. So it's one of the things that a lot of people are like, oh, I'm thinking about putting my kid either in martial arts or in soccer or basketball. I was like, well, there's really no contest in my mind. They should go to martial arts because of that aspect, that it's not just about putting on the uniform and you're a martial artist for the length of your class. It's something that should now bleed into every aspect of your life. You are a martial artist on and off the mat. You live these principles.
Sure.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conversations from the Hearth. Today we are joined by Sensei Shaun Devoy, a lifelong martial artist and founder of Satori Life Center. Devoy Sensei grew up surrounded by martial artists, both friends and family. He shared his first martial arts memory with his grandfather in their backyard, where they practiced self-defense moves rooted in judo and Japanese jiu-jitsu. Devoy Sensei began formal training around 4 years old in South Africa at a dojo teaching Shukukai Shitoryu karate. After earning his first degree black belt in 1996, he has since returned to the United States and traveled abroad in his warrior's pilgrimage, or Mushashugyo, studying in arts such as Okinawan karate, Japanese kickboxing, taekwondo, Japanese and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Bujikan Nimpo taijutsu, and more. Devoy Sensei currently manages a martial arts school in Utah and teaches adult private lessons focused on traditional martial arts through the filter of practical self-defense, our topic of conversation today.
So what is a traditional martial arts in your mind, and what is a progressive martial art?
Oh, very, very good question. A tricky question, because it does depend on the tradition that you're discussing. As you mentioned with judo is a very good example of this, because we have a kind of a clear line. You have Kano Sensei, who studied all these Koryu arts in a time when Japan was losing kind of the flavor of old school martial arts. They didn't particularly like the samurai culture anymore. They're embracing more Western ideas. So from that model, I think it would be easy to say that more the arts that were used in the battlefield or preserved under the paradigm of combat-based martial arts before judo was implemented. You even look at some of the nomenclature. You have Bugei is an older way to say martial arts in Japanese, and then you have Bujitsu comes a bit later. And then finally, it's Budo. And each represents a change in focus. You have judo. It is in its modern form, it's primarily sportive. You see more Olympic judo than you see old style, early 1900s judo. So for me, when martial arts were closer to the original intent, battlefield, or it depends on the tradition, of course, this would be, in my mind, more traditional. Now, there are other people who say, no, there is such a thing as traditional karate, like the Japanese karate, some people say is traditional. And someone like myself who studied Okinawan karate, like, whoa, hey, Okinawan karate is traditional. So it all depends on where you slice that pie, if that makes sense. So the more progressive, I think, is less to do with the style and more the practitioner. You can be a traditional martial artist and still have the cutting edge approach to training and keep an open mind. I think that's much more important. You look at all the founding masters of traditional disciplines, quote unquote, they all had this, they faced the same challenges that modern martial art masters face, in that, this balance of what I learned versus what I'm studying, and you have these splinter organizations form because they're testing out what they inherited. So in a weird way, almost being progressive is a type of tradition in itself. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, that's a really interesting definition, and I think it makes sense. I think when most people think of traditional martial arts, they usually think of, karate and taekwondo and hapkido and these martial arts. And some of them obviously can trace that lineage back to battlefield martial arts. Some may not be able to, but I think they would be all kind of lumped into traditional martial arts. One of the things that I would put on there as well is a heavy emphasis on, respect and discipline and martial arts for a purpose that is just higher than fighting. For me, being a martial artist it's very, and I wouldn't give my son or daughter a gun without teaching them how to use it. And so for me, that is integrally tied to the martial arts and what makes us different than just some fighter. It's not just fighting. Fighting disciplines have existed for forever, but martial arts is kind of a special thing. And in my mind, in the modern biome, maybe people would say fighting is higher than martial arts, but in my mind, martial arts is higher than fighting because it's fighting with a purpose.
Makes a lot of sense. I think you see this change throughout history. The emphasis, a lot of the politics of the time will influence the development of the martial art. You have like the example of the jiu-jitsu becoming judo. Clearly, it's more of that philosophical aspect added to jiu-jitsu, and combined with more of the sportive play, a censoring of some of the techniques, and you get judo. The cool thing about these days living in the U.S. and this interconnectivity with technology is that you get the best of a lot of these different aspects. You can train traditional martial arts and understand the philosophy and the principles at the same time be practical. But absolutely right that there's a person throwing punches and kicks doesn't necessarily learn the deeper aspect to martial artists. That I say a lot of tell this to a lot of my students that anything that you do should reflect your martial art. How you interact with someone at the grocery store, how you treat the CEO and you treat the janitor is going to tell me a lot as to your approach to martial arts. So especially when you get into even the self-defense training, I don't teach people martial arts, particularly extremely practical type of martial arts, if I don't think their character's in check. It would be rather counterproductive or raising a bad society, so to speak.
And I would also add, and this has been my experience, both for myself and working with other people, the more you handle things physically by fighting on the floor, the more you want to handle things physically because you become very dominant in that realm. So when words start to fail you and you can't verbally raconteur your way out of a situation, you tend to want to puff out your chest and say, well, I'm going to physically handle this. And if you don't pile on an equal measure of moral training, respect, discipline, self-control, these sorts of things, you're very likely to fall prey to that kind of mindset. And so, that's why I think it's so important. So important. And I don't exclude myself from that. I think it's, that's not the way to handle things. In my mind, we should use self-defense only in rare situations when it's absolutely necessary. It's not something that we go around flaunting and using to intimidate people.
With proper training, the ability to handle that verbal assault, you'll be able to, hopefully, 90% of your situations that ever occur, you should be able to tactfully resolve just in that realm. If your training is appropriate, if that makes sense, if it's relevant to the situation. What tends to happen is you're only able to speak through the language that you're taught. So I see a lot of martial arts schools, you'll end up on the mat and everything is physical. They never discuss that, what violence actually looks like, how it escalates. When they're in the realm of like, okay, throwing punches and kicks and clinches and throws and whatnot, they're very, very comfortable in that realm. But it's the lead up, the gray area between, is it a fight yet and it's not, is where I think most martial arts tend to fail. And it's always just the lack of training. So to your point, proper martial arts teaches you that confidence that, okay, I don't need to default to that right straight or whatever to end this fight. I have the skills to verbally de-escalate. And I also have the confidence that I don't have to rise to every challenge and, like I said, puff out your chest. part of good self-defense, of course, is that level-headedness to see really what is worth physically reacting to and what isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I could keep going down that road a lot. But
That's a great, that would be a great later conversation, you know, that opening up the idea of the lead up and then kind of
yeah,
the
because
aftermath.
I'll just say one thing before we move on, which is that, you know, a lot of parents come to me and they want me to teach their kids to be like these monsters. So you can just go out and murder anybody who messes with them. And that's just a totally wrong mindset. You know, you basically want me to make your kid into a bully. And what you have a kid, he's getting socially isolated, and then he gets ostracized, and he's having trouble in school. He comes to us looking for confidence and to fit back into society. The worst thing he can do is when the kid, his friend, or not really friend, but kid at school says like, hey, Four Eyes, and he just goes over and then like curb stomps him into the ground. That's the fastest way for that kid to get socially ostracized for the rest of his life. You know what I mean? So just having physical prowess and the ability to defend yourself and fight doesn't mean that you're going to be able to put yourself in a better position in your social hierarchy that's around you. It's better for you to learn those social skills, that verbal judo like you're talking about, so that you can navigate that. And one of the things that I try to impress upon my leadership team all the time is that a lot of the people that are coming in here have been sort of cast out of society, and they're looking for companionship, friendship, and they just need somebody to be patient with them, you know, as they kind of struggle to you know, articulate themselves and become leaders. Be patient enough to be their friend and stay by their side until they can develop those social skills to get back on the right track at school and at home, at work, and wherever is needed. Yeah. Any final thoughts before we move on from that?
No, absolutely. You never know the reason that someone comes to your martial arts school. You know, somebody walking in, sometimes they'll tell you, like in the case, like, oh, I need this, and this for my child or for myself. But it's the instructor's role to give kind of the right medicine, so to speak. Sometimes, like you're saying, the parent might not know the right dosage of medicine that the student needs, particularly in the realm of like conflict resolution and, you know, physical violence. But that's where the instructor should be, you know, the expert, and know exactly what to do. It's multifaceted, the functions and the benefits of martial arts. So it's one of the things that a lot of people are like, oh, you know, I'm thinking about putting my kid either in martial arts or in soccer or basketball. I was like, well, there's really no contest in my mind. They should go to martial arts because of that aspect, that it's not just about putting on the uniform and you're a martial artist for the length of your class. It's something that should now bleed into every aspect of your life. You are a martial artist on and off the mat. You live these principles.
Sure. Okay, so getting back on topic, making traditional martial arts practical. Where do you start with that? What does practical mean to you, and how do you?
Oh, good question. So we had earlier that definition of, you know, what is traditional, what is practical. See, I grew up in South Africa, which is culturally a rather different type of thing. So when learning martial arts, you don't usually get a person who's like, oh, I'm learning it to do tricks and backflips and all this kind of stuff. It was very much practically focused because you didn't have to think too much about like, what does violence actually look like? You know what I mean? It was there. So to answer the question, you know, practical means, you know, things go south really fast. Somebody is on you, and it's not it's not a sportive event. It's someone actually trying to physically cause you, you know, permanent damage, end your life. What can you do in that type of situation? So when we think of kind of the cliche traditional martial arts school, it's, at least in the Japanese method, it's kind of the kihon, the basics, then the kata, these formal patterns of movement that you do, and then it's kumite, which is a rule-based sparring that you would practice. And then they'll sprinkle in self-defense kind of as an afterthought, like, okay, we got about 5 minutes, run through self-defense 1 through 4. They treat self-defense much like they treat kata. It's kind of a box that you check off, and you're like, oh, you've got it, you're self-defense approved. That's not kind of how it plays out. So rather than how I used to teach martial arts was very much, you know, following that particular pattern. But if you think of a student joining your school and they train, say, for 6 months and they quit after 6 months, what have they learned in terms of what they can practically apply? Punching the air or blocking, or I mean, that you can say something to the, maybe the benefit of coordination and control and all these type of principles. But in terms of somebody grabbing you and throwing you against the elevator, knifing your neck, kind of a thing, it's you haven't taught the student that much in that realm. So for me, the practical martial arts is what actually works when I need it. In that, when everything else has failed, chips are down. What does that look like? So I have kind of a filter in my mind, because I've done, like yourself, I've done a lot of different martial arts. And the struggle that I see teaching practical martial arts, at least from the traditional perspective, is when you have studied a lot of different martial arts, you have many answers for one or two questions, if that makes sense. So somebody throws a punch, like, okay, I'll bob weave, or I'll cover, or I'll sword hand block. But under stress, and that situation is imminent, you can't do 3 moves, you have to choose one. So the first principle that I kind of focus on when I'm teaching self-defense is simplicity. That's the principle number one. Under stress, that's what you're going to be able to access. That's what you're going to be able to apply. And I have a list that I kind of go through, but simple is the first one. And simple in the sense not only of the technique, but also there's this balance in the technical choice and how you train the technique. So you can have practical techniques, but how you train the practical techniques might not be that practical. So when I say teaching martial arts in a practical manner, or making traditional martial arts practical, I think there's something to be said for a practical way of teaching effective techniques.
Yeah.
Making sense, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I think, one of the things that BJJ did really well is it has this formula of basically 50% drilling, 50% sparring, which I think is really important to accomplish a lot of what you're talking about. Because through sparring, you kind of realize, everyone realizes that simplicity is king. You can have all this stuff going on in your head, but it doesn't really matter when you get down to brass tacks and you're actually got somebody standing in front of you trying to punch your head off. So yeah, for sure. And I think it's a really complicated subject as well, to go off a little bit in a different direction. When I was over in Korea, for example, I trained in Taekwondo when I was a kid, and much like you, I just wanted to learn how to defend myself. I didn't care about doing flashy kicks and all this other stuff. And I think most Americans are like that. One of the problems that Taekwondo has right now is it's basically been killing itself over the last like 15, 20 years, as it's just been so focused on sport and on the Olympics. And the reason why that is the same reason that Koreans don't care about their traditional culture and they're tearing down all their historic buildings and they put up these concrete sky rises, is they're just so focused on anything forward that makes it to the world stage that's the direction they need to keep moving. And they have made some incredible leaps and bounds because of that. You get K-pop and Korean dramas and Taekwondo and a lot of stuff getting out there and getting seen. But the thing that's so sad is, just like in Korea, the people who are protecting those historic neighborhoods, the last ones in Korea are all expats, is because that culture is more embodied by Westerners and the Western mindset. And where we're coming from, everyone else, I feel like, in the world besides like East Asia, is self-defense. We want to learn self-defense. And that's why we're interested. I've had on my prospective student survey, Olympic sport since the day I opened 6 years ago. Not one person has ever checked it, that they're interested in that. Everyone's interested in self-defense. Everyone checks that one. Fitness and leadership life skills. Those are the reasons people do martial arts. And anyway, so I started for that reason. And, that's very close and near and dear to my heart. Practicality, self-defense. I agree with a lot of what you're saying there. But when I went over to Korea, I found a lot of people were just obsessed with sport. And, at the Hagwon level, the Jeokwan level actually was very low level martial arts. I thought even lower than America. Because in America, even the good martial artists, they stay at the academy level and they make the academy more appear. But in Korea, if you're serious about Taekwondo, you go to the elementary school team, the middle school team, and you train with them. And at that level, that is way higher than anything over here. There's no equivalent over here. Even these MMA guys who think they're so great, such great athletes, and they're training 4 hours a day. Yeah, right. You know, my wife, who you met, master son of, she trained 8 hours a day in 2-hour sections. And when she went off to her boarding school, she was told, you're going to sleep right next to your coach, and your coach is going to shave off your head, and he's going to tell you what you can eat. You can never wear makeup. You can't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, and you're going to basically eat, sleep, and breathe nothing but martial arts. And that's your life. So these people, their athletic level is way up here. I mean, they're not, you can't even compete with them. Americans are like, yeah, I work my 9-to-5 job, and I roll in and I do a couple of extra hours of training. It's like, no, they're not the same. They're not the same. Okay. But here's the thing. The Taekwondo guys are so obsessed with Olympic sport that they're doing now. Olympic sport has gotten so screwed up with all the rules being so complicated and whatnot. You see like scorpion kicks and all this stupid flippy dippy stuff that doesn't work in reality. But if they just took a little bit of time and changed the way they were doing those moves, you know, they would be monsters. They would be monsters. They would be murdering a lot of the, like, you know, Muay Thai guys back here in America that are, you know, been trained to train a couple hours a week. So it's just this, like you said, it's this hard line where it's like, well, how are you spending your time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you can train really, really hard, but if you're not putting it in the right place, it's not gonna amount to the gains that you want. And on the other hand, you can be a great technician up here, okay? But if you're not a great athlete, you're not going to be a great fighter or, you know, great at fighting. You know what I mean? That's very important too. So you need both of these sides of the coin.
Oh, absolutely. The sport issue is an interesting one because back to the judo example, you had judo before was a much bigger category. You look at the Kodokan Judo written by Kano, one of the staple books of judo. It has striking in there, tons of ground, clinch, lots of throws that are now illegal. But then judo now is primarily Olympic judo, and then a small piece of it has switched to full spectrum training of judo, and the skill set is quite different. Karate was a demonstration sport in the last Olympics, and in my mind, it was a bit atrocious, actually. They had one of the fights, guy gets kicked in the head, knocked out. They have to wake him up and award him his gold medal because the rules state that you can't excessive force to knock somebody out. It's just backwards logic to me. Anytime you have that overly specialized skill set, of course, you have a lot of practitioners training in it, and you're going to get some really, really impressive athletes. But we also fall, I think, in love with that as representing something that it's not. Okay, that's reality. Well, no, it has aspects of reality to it. We just have to understand where those parameters lie. I remember training with she was from the East Coast. She was a Taekwondo, I think a 4th or 5th degree black belt. She's really, really good. She had done a lot of the Olympic style. All we had to do was modify her kick to just a low line type of a kick. And the amount of power that she could produce, everyone in the room would just stop training and just looked over her hitting the bag. It was a self-defense based type of kick, just a low line kick. And I asked her, have you ever thrown it like that? No, I haven't. But she has all that skill set from the Taekwondo training. So it's just a modification sometimes, just a slight calibration.
You know who Duke Rufus is?
Yes, yeah, famous kickboxer.
Yeah. So I trained with him, okay? When I first went over there, I started training with them, and the Duke Rufus was showing me kicks. His coach was showing me kicks. My kick was like 10 times stronger than, 10 times is an exaggeration, but it was a lot stronger than anyone else on the floor. I was just laying people out left and right. And, the slight modification, the way that you actually kick in karate is not that different from Muay Thai. And Muay Thai likes to focus a little more on the shin, but it's generally a similar way to generate power. So all you need to do is just make slight adaptations, and the skill that you've been honing will become effective. That's why those judo guys, if they just learned a little bit more about jiu-jitsu, they would be monsters. They would be monsters because they understand, breaking people's balance and timing and distancing and footwork so much better than a lot of people who just go through technical theory. That's, I think, the big debate here too is, you got people on two sides of the coin. The one side is like, okay, well, in reality, the ways that we're going to win is by tearing out people's testicles and gouging out their eyes and all these horrible things that we can't do in real sparring. Okay. And then those guys, a lot of times they don't spar. Okay. I'm just making two extreme points. I know people are kind of somewhere in the middle, but they don't really spar. And then you got the other people over here who have basically made it really safe to spar. So they spar all the time, and you kind of need both. You need to like make really safe rules so people don't get injured. So you can work on your timing and distancing and all that kind of stuff and increase your fitness. But you also need to work on, those core self-defense skills. Because back when the UFC first came out, how everyone was winning? Like tearing their testicles out and gouging out their eyes in all these horrible ways that you don't see anymore. And everyone says, well, UFC is real fighting. It's like, it's not real fighting, guys, because that's how everyone was winning and everyone's getting maimed and they had to stop it.
Absolutely. And that's a solid point that you bring up. This, you do get this, there's a line in the sand, so to speak. The self-defense guy is always the guy who's like way out of shape and it's like, I just hit you in the eyes. I just kick you in the groin, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We're not saying that sparring is bad. Of course, resistance training is excellent. So one of the fastest ways to retain what you've learned, apply exactly what you've learned. So resistance training can be modified. This model from sparring, we can adapt to self-defense. So anytime you train, there's a concept called a training scar. And this is the idea that you learn a habit that doesn't necessarily aid you when you apply it. So any training drill that you do has a training scar, whether it's I'm pulling a punch so I don't hurt my training partner, or when I throw, I lift up a little bit so I don't impact the floor as much, or what's allowed to be struck and what's not. But you have to be aware of your training scars and then basically overlap your training that you fill in these scars in other ways. So of course, the danger in sparring is try to be eliminated, right? They take out all these dangerous moves. So they get really, really good at core foundational martial arts under stress. So if you don't have that in your self-defense, you might say, I'm going to poke somebody or guard somebody. But if you haven't drilled it under stress, you're not going to be able to apply it. So the ability to take resistance training, the benefits of sparring essentially, and apply it to self-defense, I think is high priority. So uncomfortable situations, contextual drills, giving life to self-defense. Even in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they do such a good job at resistance training. When they're sparring, they're going basically full force within the rule structure. But then it's always funny when some schools teach self-defense in the Jiu-Jitsu school. Then all of a sudden they change into like mannequins. And it's like, okay, you grab me here and we do this. And it gets all choppy. A school that 2 seconds ago, they were launching each other, going for chokes, full speed, full power. But that's not all schools. I mean, there are Jiu-Jitsu schools, of course, that keep that same resistance in training for the self-defense. So I think like you said, the balance is most important. And recognizing that sparring isn't reality. There is a ton of benefit to sparring, but we also have to understand that if we let two students spar in a defined rule set, they're naturally going to default to the strength. So this guy, say, he has a great backhand and a side kick. He's going to use that over and over and over because that's his bread and butter. He doesn't have to put himself in deep water, so to speak. He plays to his strength. Over time, maybe he'll go up against more advanced people who'll change angles on him and he has to change his strategy. But generally speaking, he'll play it safe. So the cool thing about self-defense training is we put everybody in the worst case possible, that there's no, you're going to look good doing this drill. No, that's not the point of the drill. It's survival. And, we can get into, this podcast or another one, creating contextual drills and things related to that. So I'm definitely not on the side of no sparring. We spar at my school, but we also do more live drilling because I think it gets the benefit of both aspects to it, and understanding training scars and training in such a way that it mitigates the amount of training scars is important.
Yeah, I'm sure you're aware of CrossFit and like the sort of philosophy behind CrossFit, where it's like we're just trying to do things that like challenge us in new ways, because when you do the same thing again and again, you get so good at it that it's not really stressful anymore. So then you try to like do other weird things to kind of keep stressing your body in new, unique ways. You remember the first time you went from your first school to your second school and you did everything so good at your first school, and then you go to your second school and the instructor asks you to do it just a little bit differently, and you're like, I suck at this. What happened? I was so good. I was like the best on the floor before, but now he's asking me to do a lead leg forward, or I got to do a little turn before I do it, and I'm falling all over the place. And that's why I think it's so important to diversify your training as much as possible to fill in all those little gaps that might exist, kind of like what you're saying, between the different things. So like for me, we go to a lot of different competitions. We don't just go to like one. And I think that will help make my students most rounded and not like try to fight within the rule set, like, oh, I gotta get in this, even a jiu-jitsu tournament, it's got a really strict rule set. You can't do ankle locks until your blue belt and leg bars until your brown belt. I don't know, they got all these rules. You can't do crab claw takedowns. I mean, that was like a bread and butter technique I learned back when I was first growing up. Anyway, there's so many things you can't do. If you can't do a jerk, like a jerk submission, obviously that's super dangerous, and you can't gouge, and you can't really do pressure points unless you want to be sort of as kind of a dickhead. There's just like so much you can't do. But if you get some of that when you're doing your live drilling, on the floor, if you can get your full contact in with your red man suit, and, you're jumping through all these different kinds of experiences, then you're going to be the most well-rounded. I mean, much the same way that like a CrossFit person is a really well-rounded athlete. You're going to be a really well-rounded martial artist.
No, absolutely. Solid point. Yeah, you want to be able to see the subject from as many perspectives as you can. It also depends on the flavor of the school. There's some schools that don't necessarily tout themselves as a self-defense school. So their focus is entirely in a different direction. I felt the difference when I went from Japanese jiu-jitsu to judo, because essentially the curriculum is actually, we have all the same throws that they have in judo, but how they break the balance, how they do the kuzushi is slightly different. I remember, osotogari, which is a stepping outward reaping throw. We would break balance like with a chin tap, fingers in the eyes, step behind and throw. I remember the judo coach asked me, okay, show me a osotogari. And like, whoa, what are you doing? No, you can't do that. That's not how we do it here. But then when I learned how they break posture, I said, okay, I can use this in Japanese jiu-jitsu. It's another way of looking at the same subject, understanding it deeper. So when I do teach throws, I use a combination of nomenclature from all the different traditions. So absolutely. One thing I would like to kind of shift to, if possible, is this filter for self-defense that we've talked about, training different martial arts. What do we decide to actually teach when we teach self-defense? Because the danger. Oh, you have a question? Yeah, go for it.
Well, it's so funny you say this. This is the next question I was going to throw in is, we have these ideas of being well-rounded, right? Not ideas, but, the truth behind that is, to be well-rounded, you have to start filling in those training scars or, those gaps in training. And what does that look like? How do you teach a curriculum that is both well-rounded, but also simple? And
good question.
So I think that's a little bit about what you're moving into.
Yes. So the trouble for a lot of martial artists, I faced this when I was putting together the curriculum that I teach privately. We learn all these different techniques, right? Like I said, bob weave, a cover, a sword hand block, slip back, whatever response you have. Now, say for example, you're standing at a coffee shop, you're sitting there, out the corner of your eye, you see somebody's arms move towards you. Now, I could choose any one of those responses to reply to that hook just coming out the blind side, but it's a split second. Now understand that in that split second, I won't have the time to distinguish whether he has a club in his hand, he has a knife in his hand, or if it's a fist. So if I do a slip, if it's a fist, no problem. If it's a knife, maybe I lost an eye. If it's a club, I just took a smack to the head. So when we talk about simplicity, it's this principle of consistency across categories. So the categories, in this case, being weapons and being empty hand. So although it's not as fashionable as it is, I do teach kind of a square blocking from just a huge gross motor attack to stop that impact, because I don't know if that's a knife, it's a stick, it's a empty hand. But I have to ensure that I survive. Now, from a sport perspective, I've never tell my students, well, block really rigid and move in and stop the attack. But if I'm teaching through the filter of self-defense, that's my first thing I have to do, is simplify my curriculum. Because if I tell the student, oh, I'm going to teach you 100 things for 100 situations, I've essentially taught them nothing for every situation. So, does that make sense?
So, it's an interesting, I agree with what you're saying. I just want to play a little devil's advocate and throw a little spice in there.
Absolutely.
So what you're describing to me reminds me a lot of Krav Maga and the theory behind developing Krav Maga, because you don't really know how they're going to attack. Most people get attacked by a knife. 80% of people get attacked by a knife don't know they're being attacked by a knife until after the fact, because it's dark, it's a small item. They think they're getting punched, and then they walk away with like 16 holes in their body. So I totally agree. But then, when I looked at, I trained in Krav Maga. I didn't end up getting a rank because they wanted like $500 a month for me to maintain rank in Krav Maga. I was like, this is totally a scam. Anyway, great marketers, because you don't realize that from the outside, but once you get into the organization, you realize it really is about this. But one of the things about their curriculum that I started to realize is it's almost too simple. And some of the things, like they have this plucky motion. Okay, someone grabs you like this, and you go boom, you break like this. And the reason why you do that, right, is because your first instinct when they grab your neck is to grab onto their wrist. So your defense should start from here. Okay, so you're going to break like this, and you're going to show a strike to the groin, and maybe come over with a couple of punches. The thing about that, though, it's not really good. It's so ridiculously hard to do that. That is incredibly hard to do. And the BJJ break like this, or many other ways of breaking out of that, are much stronger, less intuitive, but much stronger. And there's this this interplay between, okay, well, we can make it simpler and it'll be more universal, or we can make it more specific and it'll be better at its job. And it's like, you can't really get around that, so that will always be a thing to remember as you're learning curriculum and as you're developing your own curriculum as a martial artist. And I don't think there's one right answer. I'm really against dogma. I really don't like it when people think like, okay, I got the ultimate way to defend yourself. Like, let me show you how it's done. It's like, you don't know anything about martial arts if you think there's one way, like the one ultimate way. That's the kind of arrogance that got us in this place in the first place, where we all thought like, ooh, if the karate guy and the taekwondo guy fight, like let's say I'm the karate guy, I was like, I will kill that taekwondo guy. Like we don't even need to fight because I know I'll kill him. That's the kind of arrogance that existed back in the 90s before we started mixing and mashing and figuring things out.
So to your point, this balance between teaching something that is simple, could be overly simple, and there's a better answer that might be a bit more technical, we could say. It all depends on your goal. Somebody coming in, first 6 months, me teaching them maybe the best type of defense for a particular movement might be more technical. But if my goal in that 6 months is to instill foundational martial arts skills, I would play to overly simple. Mm-hmm. Now, if they plan on, okay, they've done 6 months, they've seen the self-defense, and I want to dive in deeper. Now we can play the what ifs, and it's like, okay, listen, we did this defense. Now say the opponent is really strong and the force is more this way, or they're flaring their elbows out, or they're driving their thumbs forward. It changes the dynamic slightly. And yeah, we get into these variations, and that's essentially where they approach martial arts from. Whereas traditional martial arts, from the 1950s and on approach is very specific. Right, your thumb has to be in this spot, rather than what the needs of the people coming in. You're also on a limited time as well. A person coming in might not want to focus on the aesthetic part of the practice rather than the practical. So yeah, there might be things down the road that, okay, this is a much better answer, but it's a lot more steps to it. So another principle is adaptability. So we talked about simplicity was one of them. And adaptability would be the next thing. I need to teach a simple skill set, like we talked before, that I can use in a variety of situations. So sometimes when we get more technical, we default to being more specific. So there are certain things with jujitsu, like survival jujitsu. is actually rather easy to learn. You may have figured this out, if you're messing about with your friends, trying out jujitsu moves on each other in the garage, you don't need too much jujitsu to outdo the average person. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I just know how to change position. You're one step ahead of them. But then when you say you jump to training with like a purple belt, it's like, whoa, okay. Now they know all the other stuff. And now the things I was doing before, which did catch all these other people, not going to work on this guy because he's seen all the tricks. And even so in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the brown to the black belt, the simple stuff doesn't work anymore. I mean, it can if you understand all the contingencies and the what ifs. But to your point, what I would say is it has to focus on your end goal. So if I want to instill good self-defense, say in a 6-month program. Now, granted, we all know that martial arts, good self-defense is a lifestyle, right? Good self-defense is an all-encompassing practice. But people coming in to martial arts, fitness, self-defense, those are the 2 boxes mainly that they come in for. So in the first 6 months, that is what I want to get them attached to. And if they do quit, that's the benefit that they're leaving with is that. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
I think it's the difference between self-defense courses and martial arts to me. Like when I teach a self-defense seminar, I'm just trying to bundle up the most effective, simplistic things I can to get them up to the highest speed possible. I might not even show them how to do a punch because a punch is really hard to do. A punch, you have a good chance of breaking your hand if you don't land it right. It's actually hard to keep your wrist taut. When you're first starting out, palm strike's much better choice. Hammer fist, elbow strikes, keeping it really simple. Here's something. Okay, let's go off in a little bit different direction because here's a problem I have. Okay, you say you're working at Premier Martial Arts, and we know Premier Martial Arts is one of the biggest franchises in America, and they're very good with kids, and they have a very big kids following, right? And then on the other hand, you're doing your private martial arts instruction, which sounds like it's really badass and hardcore, and like elite SWAT training or something like that. Okay, so these are two extremes, right? And like we were discussing before the show, if you want to do martial arts every day, like it's the only thing you're doing with your time, you kind of have to do martial arts professionally, which means you have to have kids because kids is where a lot of the money is coming from so we can keep the lights on, right? Well, in my own development of really practical self-defense curriculum, one of the things that I've run into is like, yeah, it's really fun when you take that little 6-year-old and you say, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to slap him in the groin, then you're going to hit him in the ears, and then you're going to like poke outside. It's like, the kids just are like, whoa, this is just way too much at like 7, 8 years old. Like if I say, okay, go in there and like do a jab cross, and a roundhouse kick, they're like, okay, I can do that. But when I start talking about like headbutting them in the face and gouging out their eyes and stuff like that, which is, of course, very practical self-defense, it's like, whoa.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when mom's on the side watching their kid and, the instructor just said, hit him in the neck. It's that Cobra Kai thing, right? Yes, absolutely. All my private students, I should put the caveat, all my private students are adults. I teach adults. But to your point, yes, Premier Martial Arts has tons of kids classes. And generally speaking, how I teach kids classes, it's everything that we teach. This is, I think, for a good model for martial arts as well as the business of martial arts, is it must be catered to the person who's coming in the door. I think this is also a struggle for a lot of traditional martial arts schools. Some guy comes in, it's like, I'm looking for fitness and self-defense. Okay, get in a horse stance and punch the air. This kind of a thing. Doesn't fit that model. And the same thing with kids. I can't be teaching eye gouges and, okay, drop him on his head and stomp him on the throat, this type of a thing to a child. But what is something that a parent would want them to learn? Basically, defense against a bully. I mean, you hear sometimes, abduction cases. Statistically, such a small number. More likely, bullying is going to be the issue. So techniques that deal with bullies in a safe way, but more less eye gouges. More the idea of assertiveness, controlling distance, learning to clinch safely, foundational strikes. And to your point, the fist versus the palm heel, a lot of the combatives that I teach for the self-defense is drawn from, the World War II, Fairbairn methods, palm heel strikes, exactly the same idea that you were mentioning. But regarding the kids, yes, you have to customize it to whoever's coming into your school. So I would never teach a child, an eye gouge or a groin strike. Would be character development would be number one, fighting, avoid fighting, assertiveness. These type of character attributes I would instill in the students before.
That character development is so important. I know it's not the topic for today, but I feel like it's so intrinsically intertwined with everything we talk about in the martial arts, because when that kid comes in, the parent wants us to teach him how to fight. But what the parent really wants, they don't know it, is they want that kid to become a leader so that people look up to him and he doesn't have to fight. And the way to do that is through that character development, the respect, the discipline. That's it's the most important thing to take away. And for me, like when I'm working with children and when I'm working with white belts, the thing that I'm trying to do is impart those skills first before we even get into the really hardcore self-defense skills, because I want to make sure that they're an adult, that they're vetted, they're not someone that's coming in just trying to be a tough guy, and that they're a kid, that they understand why we're doing martial arts in the first place.
To the making traditional martial arts more practical, we talked about kind of that simplicity aspect. That's a big one. Adaptability, kind of the Swiss Army knife approach, right? The basic skill set applied. Another one I would add to that is functional. It has to actually do its job. It has to work. There's a lot of stuff in martial arts that doesn't pass the functionality test. You can do certain techniques, and there is a caveat to this, which we'll get. But generally speaking, under stress, somebody attacking you, does it work in that situation? Does it function? A right cross, palm heel, or a fist? It's functional. Somebody grabs you. A lot of my friends practice, traditional Japanese karate, and the reverse punch. That's their bread and butter, and it fits in a lot of situations. Somebody grabs you by the collar, reverse punch. Grab you by the wrist, reverse punch. Distance, reverse punch. It passes that filter. But there are other things in martial arts that don't pass that particular filter. A lot of turning or jumping or things that are excessively flashy. So that would be the kind of the calibrator to the point earlier with something that may be a bit more technical. Under stress, it has to be simple, it has to be adaptable, it has to be functional at the same time. And then the last one I would add to that, and I see that Jesse's taking notes. What a great student you have taking notes, astute, right? Would be explosive. This idea that we might get into this idea thinking, okay, I've done judo for a long time, and given enough time, I can out judo most people, or I can out jujitsu most people. But violence is sudden, and it's on you. It's not when you expect. Time isn't in your favor. It's not, I'm going to win through several rounds and wear you down. No, it's instant. So your response has to be, for lack of a better word, explosive. So if you've been keeping notes, SAFE, SAFE, simple, adaptable, functional, and explosive is the mantra that we're pushing, at least in this podcast.
I think it's great. It's awesome. Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, where I would go with that, the thing that's coming to mind is like, that's all true, but is that enough to keep people for 50 years? Like, is that enough? Because like there's this sort of balance where it's like, okay, this is really what I need to teach you, and it's like a handful of techniques, and you just need to practice those every day, and you'll be great. But if you do that for the rest of your life, you're gonna be bored out of your mind, So then we kind of have to sprinkle in like all this fun stuff, like, yeah, the spinning kicks aren't the most practical. Some of them are. Spinning hook kick, man, is a really good way to knock somebody out. That might not be the thing I turn to on the street when I'm in my street shoes and it's a slippy surface and all that kind of stuff. But against an advanced practitioner, I have knocked a lot of people out with spinning hook kick. And there, even tornado roundhouse kick, you get a ton of power. I take your head right off your shoulders. Now, there's also a lot of techniques that I thought would never work. Okay, a lot of wrist lock submissions. I thought, oh, these would never work. And then I got better at jiu-jitsu, and I was like, I was doing all over the place. People are like, what? Because they're not expecting it. They're really good surprise attacks, right? Little foot sweeps. You think, oh, those aren't going to work that well. You got to do something powerful, like a double leg, single leg, all this kind of stuff. They're not expecting a little foot sweep. You're moving around, whoop, whoop, the person falls over, bam, you get on top of them. And like, so a lot of things that you wouldn't think would work, they actually work. Like almost everything works at some level. Okay, it worked at the right moment. When you catch them off guard, things will work. But are they going to be the thing that you want to turn to as your bread and butter move that you use every single time? No. But that group is very small. It is very small. And the more that you know, the more you train, the smaller that group gets. Okay. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like, is that enough to sustain people? Because if people want to get good at anything, they're not going to train for 2 months, 6 months. You can take some of the most applicable stuff in the world. If they only do it for 6 months, they're going to be rubbish in my mind. That you can't get that good. You know, that's one of my biggest pet peeves about martial art movies is that little like week-long like motivational montage, and then the guy comes down, he's this like martial art legend. It's like, that's not how it works, guys. You got to spend like 20 years training hard to like become like a human weapon if that's what you're looking to achieve.
No, absolutely, and solid point. So the self-defense, the goal isn't necessarily to be a tournament champion. The idea is basic martial arts. So a restructuring of what we traditionally think. Now, when I said earlier, kind of traditional to different people will kind of tell you a lot about their practice. So somebody who comes from a traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu perspective, traditional is warfare, old school. U.S. Practitioner doing like judo, it's like 1950s or early 1900s judo is traditional. When I'm talking about making traditional martial arts that we see now, it's the standard teaching the basics, teaching kata, and teaching free sparring, that model that has become the staple for traditional martial arts. I don't think that model facilitates self-defense retention very, very well. So what I would say is when the student comes in, the basics need to be the basics for self-defense. And then, of course, we want them to be lifelong martial art practitioners because, they're not going to be able to sustain their practice. Like, oh, practice your whatever number of foundational strikes and your whatever number of this and this many, that it has to be a bit more. You have to get them enculturated into the practice. So you do that by offering this training and then seeing where the extension goes in terms of like, okay, this is where your self-defense training kind of caps. And here's where this is what could happen. You want to know a bit more, you have to practice more. We can't train you in everything in a 6-month course. So from a business perspective, as well as from a martial art perspective, leading knuckles first, teaching practical martial arts right at the beginning, and then having them see, okay, there's actually more to this. I can see where this technique came from, why it was chosen, how it can evolve, how it can blossom. And I think you get, when the student down the road who started as a practical minded person comes in and they learn kata, their filter is a lot different than someone who learned kata purely for the aesthetic of kata. They're actually seeing practicality in this. Also, another point I think that's important to mention, if we teach self-defense in a way that is how we teach traditional kata and basics, it will become very, very boring. I think that resistance element, the ability to disguise repetition, that's a solid instructor must have. That's where the instructor adds their flavor to it. Are they using language? Are they using escalation? Are they adding aggression and resistance to the training? Is it contextual training? Stuff that the person can actually see them self-applying. And in that regard, you'll be able to teach the basics, the self-defense core, a lot longer than I think what we might expect. It all falls to, are we teaching the effective techniques in an effective way? I think I mentioned that a bit earlier, that it's a twofold path. You can teach the most dangerous or whatever criteria of techniques you have, but if you're not teaching them in a way that they can actually see them applied, see the value of it, they're not going to stick around. They're like, okay, I've got it, wrist escape, I've got it, hands up, this type of a thing. But when you add that aggression, I think it fires off all the same benefits that you get in sparring. They can see some of the benefits in the self-defense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, no, a good instructor can, take a small amount of curriculum and really push it out. There's no doubt about that. At some point though, you need to spice it up a little bit. I'm sure you trained in Korea a little bit when you were over there, maybe?
The Taekwondo, or I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo in Korea. I did a little bit of Hapkido as well while I was there.
The reason why I ask is because, the Korean mindset about teaching is like very, very simple. Like just focus on like the core skills and just teach them to nauseam. And like, I think most, especially like maybe not the academy level, but when you join the team, like for example, like my wife, when she first joined her team, she spent 6 months just bouncing. That's it. Like that's all she worked on, because footwork is incredibly important. And so she just did jump rope and bouncing and footwork and stuff for 6 months. And then she did all the kicks really slowly, because like that's really important, to be able to do the kicks very slowly so you can put your foot in the right position, and like layering in these things in the most simplistic but very, very effective way. In Western curriculum, you'll look at like really top-notch like fight gyms and stuff, and they have tremendous amounts of curriculum, and it's because the Western mindset wants that, oh, I want more little things and tricks and stuff like that. And like, if you don't have it, Westerners aren't entertained. So I think, both these cultures, every culture has some great things and some bad things. And both these cultures have something to teach us. And like you said, simplicity is king. But also in Korea, they have like 3 students and they're all really good, but that's it. And in America, you get like 300 students. Okay. So the key is, and if you do it right, I think you can get 3 of those 300 students to be very good too. So trying to balance those 2 worlds.
Oh, absolutely. Solid point. It's culturally, the U.S., when they approach any kind of sport or martial arts, it's from that kind of consumer perspective, right? So they approach the dojang, and they expect that they're giving money and then they're going to get something in return. Like, okay, how many techniques did I learn? How many belts did I get? That's kind of the mindset they're looking at. Whereas when you go in depth with martial art practice, the deeper level to it, of course, all those other trimmings kind of fall off. And the value of slowing down your technique, analyzing every little detail, you understand it because you're not worried about all the other stuff. You know that, okay, this is making me better. But it's a lot harder to teach that to a beginner who hasn't gone through all the trials. Like you said, that's at a much higher level in Korea, for example. So there's definitely to it. That's why I do enjoy teaching private lessons, one-on-ones, because you can go deeper. You can get really specific about certain things, and I think that's why a lot of students do private lessons, is specifically for that. That the group class, the focus is different. You're playing to the common denominator of the group, but when you do a private lesson, you can go a lot deeper, custom to the student. You can look at certain foundational skills that maybe they skipped over, that were passed off when they shouldn't have been passed off in terms of group classes.
Yeah. No, we've had a lot of success with private lessons. In fact, it's one of the things that we've been leaning into over the years. We have pretty challenging testings, and we have a lot of curriculum. And my master, would come and he'd say, Master Rhodes, you just have too much curriculum. This is crazy, like all these defense, we have self-defense moves and forms and stuff. And he does like half of a form, and he's got like no self-defense moves anymore. And he's just made it very simple. And I'm like, yeah, but I believe in my students. I believe they can achieve it. And at first, a lot of students were failing those evaluations, and they weren't able to learn all the curriculum. And I did have to come down on some of the curriculum over the years. But one of the things that I realized in that struggle to try to get my students to the level that I knew they were able to, because I'm an American and I was able to achieve it. And I started as a little kid and I was serious. I don't want the little dragons thing or anything like that. I want to be Bruce Lee. When I was 6 years old, like I was serious about it. And I thought these kids can be serious too. It's just how you treat them, right? So I treated them as adults, and we gave them an adult amount of curriculum, and they were struggling because in America, we become a little pampered, but with the private lessons, we've had incredible success where we say, look, if you're having trouble, just get a private lesson. We'll go through systematically all the curriculum with you so you can learn it and get in your body at a high level of proficiency with an instructor. And that's been super helpful. And then that's sort of branching off into some people just wanting to do a private lesson to work on certain skill sets. So I know you were talking about, you did a lot of private lessons, and And not a lot of people do that. A lot of schools, you know, they just focus on the group lessons, but I think there's a lot to be offered in those private lessons.
I mean, absolutely. Entering a martial arts school for a lot of people is a very intimidating thing. I mean, you look at all these cliches, the Karate Kid universe, you walk in and there's this instructor that's sizing you up and you got a target on your head, basically. It's not a pleasant experience. Now, you compound that with someone who's been sexually assaulted, for example. They walk into a school, majority of the class is men. And the guy teaching is like 6'4", 300 pounds. He's going to teach you self-defense, right? How much faith do you really have in that technique that he's going to teach you is going to work in an actual situation? Your physicality is different, your emotions different. This guy, like part-time MMA fighter, it's not the same. Whereas with private lessons, it also falls a bit more on the skill of the instructor to establish that rapport with the student, understand the student's needs, and then adapt and teach them really what, like we talked about, that medicine before, the right amount for that student. I've seen people, at least in the group classes, some women have come to the class, broken down certain triggers, certain hand positions on the neck, trigger, and they break down, they're crying. And I would invite them to do a private lesson, or invite them to train with my wife, or do something that's not in that group setting. Drastically different, huge change, because they feel comfortable. First of all, you're going at their own pace. It's a much different experience, but there is always a balance. At some point, you do need different body types. You do need a bit of aggression, and that's when the group class, of course, comes in. But that the basics, I think, learning them from a private lesson is one of the best ways to do it. When I do travel abroad, like when I went to Okinawa, I made sure I was training group classes as well as private lessons with the instructor, because you get inside the instructor's mind a little bit. You learn much more about them, the more depth associated with it. I think that could be a potential future avenue for a lot of martial arts schools. Is they do have private lessons, but it's never pushed as much as the group class, of course, because of time and because of the number of students that you want to get in. But to kind of save the character of martial arts as well, I think private lessons really, really important.
I remember reading once, like back when I first moving back to America, that the wealthiest Korean in America was a Taekwondo teacher who taught principally private lessons. And I thought, wow, that is weird, you know? So there's a way to make those private lessons work. Not only, obviously, we've just been talking about the benefits of them, which are extraordinary, but financially too, to make it work out with private lessons like that. I don't know how we're getting there, but I don't know the wealthiest Korean in America teaching private lessons, but I mean, apparently it's possible.
It is interesting to think. Yeah, I think with martial arts being a lot more accessible these days, any person naturally can be more discernible. So they can Google search and look up what you teach and compare it to this and that. So that's where the quality comes in. And I think, to your point, the gentleman who is able to make a very good living teaching private lessons, probably he's been able to check that box of quality a lot higher, so that in their mind, they don't have, okay, this is the budget for karate lessons. No, it's a lot higher, because karate or martial arts, taekwondo, is really important to them because of the quality that they see it benefiting them. Whereas we as a martial art industry are still competing with some of these sports, basketball, football, even though in my mind they're not the same thing. It's not even the same.
That's our principal competition. Like a lot of times we get so infighty, but the truth is the school down the street that has about 100 students is not your competitor. I mean, not really. They're a drop in the bucket. The gym right across from you, the Gold's gym across from you that has like 10,000 members. Yeah, that's a much bigger competitor. The soccer league that's got like 10,000 competitors in it, that's a much bigger competitor than you. The dance gym, or the with a tumbling gymnastics gym is what I'm thinking of. Those are much bigger competitors to you. Those are huge facilities with tons and tons of students. So I think it's good to remind ourselves of that.
Absolutely. So back onto the kind of the practical side. Any questions you guys have? You mentioned student questions, something to that effect.
So not so much student questions. I'm sure students have questions, coming in, and sometimes our students will watch the show and talk to us and say,
Okay, fair enough.
it was a cool conversation. I do have one question, maybe a question to wrap it up. I know we've gone over an hour at least.
We just barely got started, you guys.
Oh, yes, sir. That's what's so fun. That's what's so fun about it. We've talked about traditional martial arts, progressive martial arts, practical martial arts, the things that make martial arts practical. Some things that I've noticed: we have practical, we have technical, and then we've kind of been skirting around specialization. And that's something I want to tap into just a little bit before we wrap up. What is the role of specialization in martial arts practice, but in self-defense practice as well? Because you can have a really good set of fundamental principles, but that's just something I'm curious about, the role of specialization. So saying, when is it necessary to specialize, and what does that look like, and how do you discern when it's time to start digging deeper into situations?
Yeah, fair enough. Good question. So I'll use kind of this analogy. Sport martial art is like taking a test, right? You know the day you're going to take the test, you know the subjects, you know the amount of questions you're going to be asking. You can prepare for that test, right? Self-defense is a much bigger question mark. So what that means is it's a test you don't even know when you're going to take it. You don't know the subjects, you don't know how long it's going to last. So for you to prepare for those tests are quite different. If I know the number of questions and I know the subjects, I can specialize. Does that make sense? I can focus on, okay, the rules of this tournament. I can't punch to the face, but I can kick to the face. I can't grab, and I can make a game plan. And you can get really, really good at that. The mistake is to think that that is what everyone is going to agree upon when they attack you. So to the point of when do you specialize? The further you get into your martial art training, I think you do specialize this naturally, and you should specialize. To the point that Master Olds raised earlier was that balance. How do you keep people motivated? Well, they do have to see more of the martial arts. They do have to see more of the traditional aspect. They have to learn the forms. My approach, of course, is they have to understand the forms through the filter of self-defense. No one will, at least in how I teach, will be able to pass their first few belt advancements without core self-defense. That is my filter. That is my litmus test, if you will, is that aspect to it. So as you dive deeper, specialize. In terms of self-defense, you can specialize in, there's different aspects. I mean, you can specialize in the percussive aspect, the striking aspect, more of the clinching aspect, more of the ground aspect. But what we don't want to do is break the fundamental rules of, disengaging, breaking free, keeping yourself safe, versus I want to win a karate match with this person, or I want to win a jiu-jitsu match with this person, when it's not that case. So part of your martial art journey, as you dive into the martial art practice rather than self-defense practice, yes, specialize, get really, really good at it, become a master in your particular field, and then study other martial arts that amplify this, and take yourself to your highest level, because this process of continuously striving for perfection is an attribute for the martial arts, an important one. And self-defense won't cut it with that. You can get really good at self-defense, and we want you to, but we also want you to be a martial artist so you can get more of the principles behind it, where these techniques came from.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And somebody has to take that sub-skill to its furthest permeation for us to figure out what are the true kernels to distill down for that core self-defense curriculum, right?
Yeah. Say one more time. Sorry.
So
I said good question. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, sir.
yeah, no, great answers. Sensei, I could talk forever. I mean, I think you could as well. We'll probably have to have you back on the show at some
Yes,
point
sir.
to talk about a different subject. But it's been a true pleasure having you on. You obviously, I think both have a similar thinking, I think, about the martial arts to us, but also you have a lot of experience, and we appreciate your insight on this topic for today.
So,
Just any final thoughts?
final thoughts. I mean, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been good, nice and easy communicating back and forth. Those are my favorite to work with, where the emails go quickly. And yeah, I have a topic down potentially for a future conversation, which is that creating contextual drills. So there's always,
Interest. Okay. Nice. No, thank you guys so much for the opportunity. I enjoyed the chat, keeping me on my toes. Good questions. I like it a lot. Yeah, thank you. And if I do make it to Texas, I definitely want to pop in and see you guys.
Yes, we'd love to have you. We'd be honored.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell. We offer in-person, group, and private lessons at our facility in Kyle, Texas, as well as virtual lessons anywhere in the world. If you'd like to learn more about our programs, you can find us online at risingphoenixtkd.com.